Your brother needs this more than you do, my father said, sliding the equity transfer document across the mahogany desk like he was passing me a dinner check. You're the strong one, Claire. You always land on your feet. My pen was already in my hand. I had been summoned to his office on a Tuesday morning in March with the same casual authority he used to call the housekeeper for more coffee. No warning, no context. Just a text that read, "Come in at 9. Important paperwork." I looked down at the document. It was a transfer of 38% of Mercer Industrial Holdings, the shares my grandfather had earmarked for me in his original succession plan, the shares I had spent 7 years earning by working 60-hour weeks as the company's in-house legal specialist while my brother coasted through 3 failed side businesses on our father's goodwill. I looked back up at my father. He was already studying something on his computer screen, as if the conversation were already over. My brother was leaning against the bookshelf behind him, hands in his pockets, wearing that particular smile he had perfected since childhood, the one that showed up whenever he got something that was supposed to be mine. Don't sign anything you haven't read, I told myself. 7 years of legal work had drilled that into my bones. I set the pen down. What exactly is the justification for this? I asked. My father looked at me then, and there was something in his eyes that I should have recognized immediately. It wasn't irritation. It wasn't even condescension. It was the practiced patience of a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the losing party to figure it out. The company needs stable leadership going forward, he said. Your brother is taking over operations. It makes sense for him to hold controlling interest. Ryan hasn't run a single profitable quarter in anything he's ever touched, I said. My voice was level. I had learned young that raising it gave him permission to dismiss everything I said. That's not a very supportive thing to say about your family, my mother said from the sitting area near the window. I hadn't even noticed her there. She was holding a cup of tea with both hands, watching me the way people watch a storm through glass. Curious, comfortable, completely protected. I pushed the document back across the desk. I'm not signing this today. I want our outside counsel to review it first. My father's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Of course, he said. Take your time. I should have known then that taking my time was already too late. The outside counsel review request was what started the unraveling, though I didn't understand that until much later. I sent the email on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the locks on my private office had been changed. My assistant, a woman named Deborah, who had worked beside me for 4 years and brought me coffee, without being asked every morning, looked at me from across the hall with an expression of pure, helpless apology. She had been told not to speak to me. HR called me into a conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner and discomfort. The director, a man named Gerald who had never once made direct eye contact with me in 7 years, read from a prepared statement. There had been an internal audit, he said. Irregularities had been found in several vendor contracts I had drafted. The company was placing me on administrative leave pending investigation. I sat very still. What kind of irregularities? I asked. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were 3 contracts, all bearing my signature, all backdated, all directing payments to a shell vendor that did not exist in any of our approved supplier registries. The total across the 3 documents was just under $200,000. I had never seen any of those contracts in my life. I drafted every vendor agreement personally, I said. These are not mine. Gerald nodded with the expression of a man who had been told to nod. We understand this is a difficult situation. We strongly encourage you to seek personal legal counsel. In the parking lot afterward, I sat in my car for 20 minutes without starting the engine. The rational part of my brain was already cataloging what I knew. The documents were forgeries. Technically competent ones, because whoever had done them knew my signature well, had probably traced it from legitimate paperwork. The backdating put the transactions during a period when our CFO had been on medical leave, which meant the secondary approval process had been looser than usual. Whoever had designed this had done it with access to internal systems, with knowledge of the company's internal calendar, with time to plan. My father had always been meticulous. It was the quality I had admired most in him for most of my life, and the quality I now understood I should have feared. The professional collapse was fast. Within a week, a story appeared in a regional business publication, vague, sourced to anonymous company insiders, suggesting that Mercer Industrial was dealing with an internal compliance issue related to a former employee. My name wasn't printed, but in a city the size of ours, everyone knew. 3 attorneys I had worked with over the years stopped returning my calls. A recruiter I had spoken to about future opportunities suddenly went quiet. In legal circles, reputation is the only real currency, and mine was being systematically drained. My brother, meanwhile, was photographed at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the company's new distribution facility expansion. He was quoted in the caption as the incoming director of operations. He looked relaxed and healthy in the photo. He looked like a man who had not done a single thing wrong. The worst arrived on a Saturday morning in the form of a certified envelope. My father's legal team had filed a civil complaint against me for breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of company funds. The fraudulent contracts I had supposedly authored were Exhibit A. Attached to the complaint was a document I had allegedly signed 18 months earlier, granting my father broad authority to make equity decisions on my behalf in the event that I became professionally incapacitated or compromised. I read that phrase 3 times. Professionally incapacitated or compromised. The signature on that document was mine. Or rather, it was an exceptional forgery of mine, the same hand as the contracts, the same controlled pressure, the same slight leftward lean that was specific to how I held a pen. Someone had studied my signature for a long time. I thought about the notary stamp. I thought about where I had been 18 months ago on the date printed on that document. I pulled up my calendar on my phone with shaking hands. 18 months ago, on that date, I had been in depositions from 8 in the morning until past 7 at night for a contract dispute case we were litigating. I had not left the building. I had signed nothing personal. My calendar had 9 entries and a note reminding me to eat lunch, which I had also not done. I had an alibi for my own signature. The problem was that alibis required someone to believe you. I called 3 lawyers in the first week. The first one took a consultation fee and never called back. The second one listened carefully, asked about my financial situation, and gently explained that the projected cost of litigation against a company with Mercer Industrial's resources would be substantial. The third one told me bluntly that without physical evidence of the forgery, I was fighting a document paper trail with my word alone, and that was not a fight she would take on contingency. I understood what I was up against. My father wasn't just a man who had stolen from his daughter. He was a man who had spent 40 years building the architecture of respectability, the board memberships, the civic awards, the charitable donations, the network of people who owed him favors or feared his disfavor. He had constructed this accusation the way he constructed everything. Methodically, in advance, with contingencies built in. What he hadn't accounted for was that I had built the company's digital infrastructure. 6 years earlier, when Mercer Industrial had outgrown its original server setup, I had been the one to oversee the migration to a new system. I had hired the IT vendor, reviewed the contracts, and because I was constitutionally incapable of letting any technical implementation go unsupervised, I had sat in on the configuration meetings. The lead technician had set up a secondary backup server, a redundant archive that captured all internal emails and document activity on a 45-day rolling cycle. Standard corporate governance practice. That server had a remote access portal. I still had my login credentials because no one had thought to revoke them. My access to the company email system had been suspended, but the backup archive was a separate system, authenticated through a different protocol that IT had never connected to HR's offboarding checklist. I logged in from my laptop at my kitchen table on a Sunday night. The archive was thorough. Mercer Industrial's email history, fully searchable, going back 7 weeks. I started with my own outbox, confirming that my authentic sent mail contained none of the fraudulent vendor correspondence. Then I searched for the vendor names listed on the fake contracts. The emails were there. Every approval chain, every internal discussion, every forwarded document, and none of it had originated from my account. It had originated from my father's executive assistant's account, authorized by my father's own email address at every stage. The communication chain for all 3 fake contracts ran in a neat, damning line straight up to his inbox. More than that, there was an email thread between my father and the attorney who had notarized the forged power of attorney document, sent 6 weeks before the date on that document. discussing the specific language needed to make the clause regarding professional incapacitation legally operable. They had written the blueprint in writing, because they had never imagined anyone would find the server. I spent the next 3 weeks doing everything quietly. I copied the archive. I had a digital forensics consultant authenticate the metadata. I found an employment attorney who specialized in corporate fraud cases and worked on contingency for defendants with strong documentary evidence. I reached out through a professional contact to an investigator at the State Attorney General's office who handled commercial fraud cases and whose direct email I had filed away from a conference I attended 2 years earlier. I did not call my father. I did not call my brother. I did not post anything. I did not tell anyone in my personal circle what I had found, because I had learned from watching my father operate for 32 years that the only power worth having is the power the other side doesn't know you possess. The annual Mercer Industrial Shareholder Dinner was held every April at the Whitmore Club, a private venue on the east side of the city that my grandfather had joined in 1974. The event had 43 attendees. The board of directors, major institutional shareholders, key management, and a handful of civic dignitaries my father cultivated for optics. It was the most important evening on the company calendar. My father had hosted it every year for 16 years. He had sent me an invitation out of what I could only assume was either arrogance or the specific cruelty of wanting me to watch my brother be formally introduced as his successor. I RSVP'd yes. I arrived early enough to speak with the audiovisual coordinator, a freelancer hired through an events company who did not know me, did not know my family, and was very receptive to a conversation about the evening's presentation setup after I explained that I needed to make a brief addition to the shareholder materials on behalf of the legal department. I had prepared a USB drive. I handed it to him with a smile and a very specific set of instructions about when to switch inputs. My father saw me come in. Something moved across his face, surprise, then recalculation, and then he smiled and crossed the room and shook my hand warmly, the way he always did in public, with both hands and extended eye contact, as if the two of us shared a joke only we understood. "Claire," he said, "I'm glad you came. I wouldn't have missed it," I told him. My mother found me near the bar and touched my arm with the affectionate firmness of a woman sending a warning signal. "You look tired," she said. "Are you sleeping?" "Better than ever," I said. My brother arrived 20 minutes later with his girlfriend and a new suit and the particular energy of someone who had recently been told that everything he wanted was about to be handed to him. He spotted me across the room and hesitated, then came over because not coming over would have been noticed. "Claire?" he said. "Ryan?" I said. He searched my face for something: anger, desperation, the evidence of damage, and when he didn't find it, he looked briefly, genuinely unsettled. I watched him go find our father near the entrance and say something in a low voice. My father glanced at me once, and then returned to greeting his guests. The dinner proceeded normally. The salad course, the main course, the predictable speeches. My father spoke about the company's legacy, about growth through difficult times, about the values of the founding generation. He spoke about succession with the careful warmth of a man who had written these lines in advance. He introduced my brother to sustained applause. I was seated at the far end of the main table. I ate my salmon and listened and watched the room and waited. The shareholder presentation was scheduled to begin at 9. At 8:58, I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and picked up the wireless microphone that the AV coordinator had helpfully left at the end of the head table. The room went quiet, with the particular attention that descends when someone does something unexpected at a formal event. "I want to thank my father for the invitation tonight," I said. "Before the formal presentation begins, I'd like to share some materials that I believe are directly relevant to the company's governance and the board's fiduciary responsibilities." My father rose from his chair. "Claire," the screen behind me changed. The email thread was projected at a scale that made every word legible from the back of the room. The first message was from my father's account. The timestamp was 14 months ago. The subject line read, POA Language Final Review. I let the room read it. I let the silence do the work for me. The thread showed, in my father's own words, the construction of the forged power of attorney, the decision to backdate it, the selection of which notary to use and why. There were 11 messages in the chain. I had printed them all and placed copies at every seat during the cocktail hour. Under the dinner programs, face down, my father was on his feet. His mouth was open. He looked, for the first time in my memory, like a man who did not know what to do with his hands. "That is a fabrication," he said. His voice was steady, but it cost him something to keep it that way. "The metadata is verified by an independent forensic analyst," I said into the microphone. "Forensic imaging of the backup archive was completed 10 days ago and has been in the possession of the State Attorney General's Commercial Fraud Division since last Thursday." I paused. "They have had 4 days to review it." I'm told the timeline was sufficient. The doors at the back of the room opened. 2 men and a woman entered in business attire. State investigators don't arrive in uniform, but there is something in the way they move through a room, deliberate, unhurried, already certain of what they've come to do, that communicates their authority without requiring an announcement. The woman held a document in her hand. My father stood very still. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before, something small and involuntary. My brother looked at me across the width of the room. His face was a clean slate, every practiced expression stripped away, leaving something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not calculation, but a kind of blank recognition, as if he had known, somewhere beneath the entitlement and the borrowed confidence, that the infrastructure of what he was standing on had always been borrowed. He sat down slowly, as if someone had removed the bones from his legs. I set the microphone down on the edge of the table. The lead investigator read my father his advisory rights in a voice that was professional and quiet and absolutely audible in the complete silence of the Whitmore Club's main dining room. My father did not say anything. He looked at his hands as if checking whether they were still attached to him. My mother was taken next. She cried, which I had not seen her do since my grandfather's funeral, and the sight of it produced in me nothing I could name, not satisfaction, not grief, just the specific neutrality of a person watching something that needed to happen. My father looked at me once before they walked him through the door. I had expected something, a final threat, a last attempt at recalibration. What I got instead was a long look that contained, if I was reading it correctly, something close to acknowledgement, as if the ledger between us had finally been submitted and the numbers had come out the way they were always going to. I looked back at him without expression. I had nothing left to say to him that I hadn't already said in the email archive. The aftermath required patience. Legal processes always do. And anyone who tells you that justice arrives quickly has never had to fight for it personally. The civil complaint against me was dismissed within 30 days once the Attorney General's investigation became a matter of public record. My professional reputation took longer. It always does, because damage spreads faster than corrections. And the people who had quietly distanced themselves did not all come back with the same energy with which they had left. Some did, some didn't. I took note of which was which. The Corporate Forensic Review revealed that the fraudulent vendor scheme had been running for 2 years, funneling company funds through shell entities to cover losses in my father's personal investment portfolio without triggering board oversight. My brother had known about it. He had not designed it, and his attorney made that distinction loudly and repeatedly. But he had signed documents he knew were irregular because he had been told that the alternative was losing his inheritance entirely. He cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge, financial negligence, rather than fraud conspiracy. He avoided prison. He lost the directorship, the equity, and the new suit, metaphorically speaking. He moved to another city. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he was working for a logistics company and that he seemed, for the first time, to be doing something with his own hands. I did not call him. I was not ready for that conversation, and I had learned by then that readiness was not something you manufactured out of obligation. The equity was restored to me in full through court order, plus damages from the liquidated personal assets tied to the fraudulent scheme. I hired a transition management firm to stabilize the company's operations during the legal process, and I served on the oversight committee that governed the restructuring. It was not the role I would have chosen. I had not, in all of this, wanted the company. What I had wanted was the record to be straight. I opened my own practice 8 months after the shareholder dinner. Corporate governance and compliance, the specific area where I had spent 7 years learning exactly what happens when the people in charge of oversight become the ones being overlooked. My office is in a building 2 miles from Mercer Industrial's headquarters. I can see their loading dock from my window on clear days. I don't look at it often. There is a particular conversation I have sometimes with myself, usually late in the evening when the office is quiet and I'm finishing the work that doesn't get done during business hours. It's the conversation about what would have happened if I had signed that document on that Tuesday morning. If I had told myself that family loyalty required a kind of silence that I now understand was not loyalty at all, but surrender. If I had swallowed the insult and kept working in a building where my name meant nothing except as a signature available for use. I think about the version of myself who might have done that. Who might have told herself that patience was wisdom, that her time would come, that making trouble wasn't worth the cost. I am glad she put the pen down. My father is serving 5 years in a federal facility for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. My mother received a suspended sentence and mandatory financial restitution in exchange for her testimony. She called me once, 6 months after the verdict, from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped I was well. She said she had never meant for things to go so far. I listened to the message twice. Then I saved it in a folder on my phone labeled Documented. Because 7 years in legal work had taught me that the documentation habit does not turn off just because the case is closed. I didn't call her back, not because I was certain I never would, but because some debts require more than a voicemail to settle, and I had learned by then that I was under no obligation to accept payments made on someone else's schedule. The sign on my office door reads, Mercer Legal Advisory. I kept the name. Some people find that surprising. A few have asked me whether it was strange to carry the name of a family that had tried to use my name against me. I tell them the same thing every time. The name was my grandfather's first. He built something real with it. I intend to do the same. What my father never understood, what I think he was constitutionally unable to understand, is that the strongest position in any negotiation is not the one held by the person with the most power. It is the one held by the person with nothing left to lose, who has been patient enough to wait until the right room, the right moment, the right 43 witnesses. He taught me everything I know about how organizations work. He just never expected me to use it. I close the office at 7 most evenings. I lock the door, take the elevator down, and walk 2 blocks to a diner where they know my order before I sit down. I eat my dinner, and I read. And I don't think about the company or the trial or the version of my life that almost got erased in a mahogany-paneled office on a Tuesday morning in March. I think about my grandfather instead. About the photo of him I keep on my desk young, early in the business, standing in front of the original warehouse on the east side, squinting into the sun with the specific expression of a man who has made a bet on himself and is waiting to find out if it pays. It paid. Some things are inherited. The question is what you choose to do with them.